Welcome to the final episode, finally, of our Liturgy series, the series that I titled Liturgy Gathering Around the Practice of Non-Duality. Looking back on it now, hindsight is always 2020, right? I think I should have just named it Liturgy as Non-Duality. That would have been much better. Because non-duality really isn't a practice. It's more of a state of mind, I guess, right? A way of perceiving reality in the world and God and self and all of this stuff. But we do have practices in our liturgy, in our Christian tradition, that help us to wake up to this non-dualistic vision. So the title's not so bad, but I wish I would have just named it Liturgy as Non-Duality. That's shorter and to the point, but it is what it is. So this is the final episode of this series. There's so many other things I would love to chase and to reflect on, but it's probably time to wrap it up. I've been doing it for quite a while now, but it'd be interesting to do like an episode on baptism. There's other little parts of the liturgy, especially in the Eucharistic prayer itself, that it would be really neat to pay attention to and to tunnel vision in on. And maybe I'll come back to it at some other point and do another series. Liturgy as Non-Duality 2.0, perhaps, somewhere down the road. But for now, we're going to conclude this series so we can move on to something else starting next week. So the focus of this part, this episode, is basically communion, receiving the bread and the wine at the altar rail, and then the dismissal. And the title of this episode is "You Are What You Eat." Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you get something out of this little teaching this evening. So as the saying goes, you are what you eat. And if there is some truth to this, which there is a lot of truth to this little saying, then the question is, what does the Eucharist teach us about what we are whenever we eat the bread and drink the wine? In meditating on the bread and the wine, the consecrated bread and wine, I should say, St. Augustine once said this. He said, "Behold what you are, become what you receive." And I've said this a few times after coming across this awesome quote in the Eucharist, right before the part where the priest normally says the gifts of God for the people of God. So I elevate the chalice and the bread and say, "Behold what you are, become what you receive." I think it's quite beautiful. Well, there's some people in our tradition who claim that the altar rail is a barrier between those sitting in the pews and those serving around the altar. They feel like the way we traditionally do things in the Episcopal Church is not like egalitarian enough, liturgically speaking. They feel like our spaces are not inviting enough or equal enough, right? I feel like there's like too much of a hierarchy happening within the liturgy itself. And while these thoughts, I'm sure, are coming from a good place, I also think the concern that these people have is quite misguided. Not saying this because I'm a person who normally wears the collar and I'm a part of the hierarchy, right? Somebody could push back and say it's easy for you to say, right? But I think folks who are concerned about like the barrier, the rail as a barrier in the sanctuary, I think it's a misguided thing. Those folks who are concerned about these things, they have yet to push aside the veil and to really gaze upon the mystery of what's actually happening during the Eucharist. They failed to perceive the deeper meaning of the Eucharist, and honestly, probably they failed to perceive this deeper meaning because the spirituality of most priests is just abysmally and horrendously shallow. If we clergy actually had the eyes to see what is happening on the altar, above the altar, around the altar, in the whole sanctuary, every single Sunday, well, the church would not be in the state that it's in today, and countless people wouldn't be running away from religion in order to salvage what's left of their spirituality. We clergy don't realize that everything that the people who claim that they are spiritual but not religious, everything they're looking for outside of the church, We actually have it at the altar rail. That could be found at the altar rail, but we clergy do not know how to direct people to this insight, to this reality, because we don't really know it ourselves. My friends, the altar rail, it's not a barrier. Not a barrier at all between those in the pews and those around the altar. The altar rail is actually the meeting place, the point of union. It's the point where all duality is overcome. The duality between us and God, the duality between us and other people, the duality between that which is on the inside and that which is on the outside, the duality between heaven and earth, spirit and physical realm, what have you, etc. And in my opinion, one of the wisest things about the traditional Christian liturgy, as it is in our tradition, but in other traditions as well, the wisdom, I think that one of the wisest things, let me start over again, about the historic Christian liturgy in comparison to some other spiritual traditions like Buddhism, for example, that also focus on attaining a non-dualistic vision. It's that we Christians, we don't begin ritualistically and liturgically speaking with non-duality. We begin liturgically speaking from a place of duality because most people today still perceive reality dualistically. In other words, Christian liturgy, when done properly, it meets people where they are at and it invites them to transcend dualistic thinking, to like wake up and shake it off. And I'll unpack this here. So, not too long ago, I was reading an article. It was written by a Buddhist, and this person had visited an Episcopal church on the East Coast. And even though they wrote a lot of positive things, they found a lot of beauty in the hymn singing and the chanting and some of the ritualism. They had a major complaint, and that was kind of the takeaway point for them. They complained that the whole experience felt dualistic. They said that the liturgy itself was riddled with dualistic language. So things like this: God is up there, we are down here. God is out there, I am in here. Jesus is up there on the altar, in the bread and the wine, right? And I am down here in the pews. Like that sort of thing. There's a big division between us and God, right? Us and everything else. And I think the Buddhist was right. This is certainly true. There is a lot about the historic Christian liturgy that is indeed dualistic. Yes, the altar party is up there around the altar. Everyone else is down in the pews. Yes, some people are wearing robes and everybody else is not. Yes, the part that represents heaven is up around the altar, whereas the rest of the space represents the earth. And yes, the language of the prayers is also quite dualistic. We're praying to a God, we're interacting with a reality that seems more outside of us than inside of us, right? There's a dualism there. But honestly, in my opinion, this is kind of the point. There are many people who would like to change the wording of the liturgy to make it sound more non-dualistic, more unitive, more Buddhist-y. But I think this would really miss the point. It'd actually be quite tragic. There'd be something tremendous that would be lost in this process because right now, our liturgy actually meets people where they are at. And most people still view life through a dualistic lens. They see division more than they see union. They see themselves as being separate from rather than connected to the whole, everything, right? Reality for them is incredibly fragmented. It's not whole. They feel like the world inside of them is vastly different from the world outside of them. And if this wasn't the case, everybody would be walking around enlightened, like Christ, like Buddha, all of the time. And we would no longer have all of the problems in the world that we currently have, because everybody would be zened out and saintly, right? But the thing is we're not all enlightened, my friends, right? Most of us have not gained that non-dualistic vision. And even if we have, we haven't lived by it very well, right? So if we were to tweak everything in the liturgy and make it completely non-dualistic, especially in its language, this would only cause a lot of confusion, I think, and frustration. It would no longer meet people where they are at. But if you can begin with where people are at and then help them to snap awake to their oneness with God and their oneness with the universe and their oneness with everybody else through the rhythm of ritualistic action, now you're onto something, right? And that's exactly what our liturgy seeks to do. So it seems to me that we don't need to change our liturgies or the wording of our liturgies or our prayers. What we need to do is help our people see our liturgies on a deeper level. To take that deeper journey, right? And the only reason that people want to change our liturgies is because they don't understand what it is that we already have. And what we already have is quite magnificent and amazing and transformative, right? Yeah, and sometimes it's just the case, church people, and especially as clergy, we just cannot see the forest for the trees, right? As the saying goes. So with all of that tangent said, let's now return to a point that I made several minutes ago. The altar rail is not a barrier. It's not a place of division. Rather, it's a meeting place. It's a place of union. At the rail, the altar party and the people in the pews to become one. They've been one all along, but at that point, you especially learn that we're all one. At the altar rail, if you remember the symbolism from several episodes ago, I think it was the third episode where we talked about sacred space, the space that represents the earth and the space that represents heaven in the sanctuary, they become one. The pew area and the altar area is heaven and earth, right? And from the body of Christ that you receive at the altar rail, you learn that you are a part of the body of Christ. And if I may even be so bold as to say this, not only that, but we also learn that the whole creation is the body of Christ. So if the question is, what exactly do we mean by the body of Christ? Is it the bread and the wine? Mm-hmm. Is it the people in the pews? The people of God? Mm-hmm. Is it the entire creation? Yes. So if you're a person that's sitting in the pews, and the area of the pews is representative of Mother Earth, what does it mean then that whenever you come up as a symbol for Mother Earth, what does it mean whenever you come up to receive the bread and the wine as Mother Earth's symbol? As St. Maximus the Confessor once taught, incarnatio continua, continual incarnation. The incarnation did not stop with Jesus' physical body, nor does it stop with the bread and the wine, nor does his presence stop with you or the people around you. The presence of Christ pervades everything. At the altar rail, if you have the eyes to see, you will notice that Christ has gone from being somewhere to being everywhere. He goes from being at the somewhere of the altar to the everywhere of everything. So think about just the progression here, the action, the kind of imagery in the liturgy, the ritualism. So we're praying to the Christ who is up in heaven, right? Heaven's not up, by the way, but that's the way we tend to think about it. We're praying to the Christ who is in heaven. And the Christ who is in heaven becomes present to you in the bread and the wine through the consecration. And in being present to you in the bread and the wine, he is also now present to you and the other people partaking of the bread and the wine, kneeling beside you at the altar rail. And in being present to you and the people kneeling next to you at the altar rail, you come to realize that Christ is present to you in every facet of the creation, because you yourself and the people kneeling next to you are symbols of the creation. Turn over a stone, Jesus said, and I am there. Cut into a piece of wood, and you will find me there. So yes, the Buddhist author that I referenced earlier is right. The Christian liturgy does start from a place of duality, but then it teaches you how to overcome it, to transcend it. The liturgy, it ritualizes, it habituates you into non-dualistic awareness. I mean, most of us, we probably show up to church after having spent a week praying to a Jesus who is outside of us, right? Up there somewhere. That's usually how most Christians pray. But think about this. Think about how powerful this is in the imagery, just the ritualism itself. When you leave church, you've fully become one with the one that you've prayed to, right? Jesus is no longer just up there somewhere. Jesus was present in the bread and the wine are now within you. quite beautiful. And at the very end of the service, after the altar party has processed back down from the altar and back into the space that symbolizes the world, the deacon gives the dismissal, and the service comes to a conclusion. There we go. I can't say words today, apparently. And while this dismissal that the deacon gives can take on many forms, it has many versions, like "Let us bless the Lord" or "Let us go forth into the world, rejoicing in the power of the Spirit." Basically, what the deacon is beckoning all of us to do is to remember that we've become that which we have received. And he's calling us, or she's calling us, or they are calling us to go forth as a living Eucharist, as a living sacrament, as the living presence of Christ to everyone around us. In other words, the deacon is calling us to become for other people and the world what the altar has just been for us. Quite spectacular. So again, my friends, as you go to church this Sunday, you should go to church this Sunday. Go to church this Sunday. And as you're receiving that bread into your hand, and if you're drinking out of the chalice at this point, just remember, you are what you eat. So behold what you are in the moment, and become what you receive. Thank you for journeying with me through this series. It's been a lot of fun for me. I've been able to geek out about something. I've geeked out about it really hard, and it's been awesome. So thank you for bearing with me and for tolerating my nerdiness so far. So it's wonderful. Thank you. We'll go in a different direction. I think we're going to do like a wisdom series starting next week and just kind of focus on some wisdom sayings, and that's what I'm thinking. We'll see. But yeah, thank you for tuning in as always. God bless.